A very senior politician from the Green Party said it won't cost more per household than one scoop of ice cream. I would say, be generous, by today's prices, let's say $2 a month extra, which is of course not the case. It's significantly more expensive. We pay in US cents 36 cents. You have to know that in New York the income is significantly higher for most people, and so it really means it's nobody told us the truth about it, and it's like any public works project, they never tell you the truth, and this game in the future from the left pocket into the right pocket with some commission, and in order to, let's say, cover up the rising costs, because it will become more expensive, period.
Hey, Tim, bringing that home to the United States, basically the Green New Deal, it's free, right, according to Joe Biden? So there's no cost at all? How does that work?
What do you mean there's no cost? I mean,
well, he said that
you could just print the money.
$3.5 trillion
good.
pays for itself.
The cost of paper, the money's printed on. I mean, that's the cost of it. I think that when you look at AOC, or when you look at Chuck Schumer, or when you look at Nancy Pelosi selling these things, I'm very familiar with that. If Dad's watching right now, I'm telling the truth right now, Dad. And I think that that is a very huge thing that we need to do more of, is hold them accountable for what they're doing, which is lying to us. It's lying to us. This isn't a net gain in jobs. This is a net loss in jobs. This isn't going to be free. This is going to cost us in every way imaginable that we could ever comprehend. Set aside the fact that it's Marxist, straight up Marxism. Disguising behind the Green New Deal. The cost is extremely immense. We all know that. We all know that. But from a messaging perspective, from someone who goes around and sees the impact on it, as we discussed, this is state policy, a lot of it that I was talking about. Imagine that coming from the federal government. It's devastating.
I think you just answered my question. Because when you give the example about the slogan, it was really just a euphemism for a lie, right? I mean, basically the research was done, but was that real research, the example you were giving? Are we supposed to believe that that was real research put into that slogan?
Yeah. Well, I guess it all depends. I mean, you know, first of all, a political slogan is exactly what that is. It's politics. It serves the purpose of the moment. So you have to be able to see that and wonder, why is it 30%? Why isn't it 40%? Why isn't it 50%? Why isn't it, why aren't we doing 100% by 2030? That would sound really, really good. Well, it's probably because it's poll tested, I would guess.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot that. They probably hired a polling company too, and they probably paid them $500,000 to figure out the right words to say. Okay. That's what we're dealing with here. You guys have any? Yeah.
It's easier to remember one number than two.
I'm from Texas, by the way, and I was not affected by the freeze, so, regular energy, yay, that we share with Louisiana, so that was great. That was great. Yes, East Texas.
My question is for Oliver, and I wish I'd have known he was an expert in hydrogen. While I was sitting at his table, I would have grilled him then. But we're from New Mexico, and our New Mexico governor, Lujan Grisham, is just last week or 10 days made the big announcement that she's going to have New Mexico be the biggest hub of hydrogen. And it's really, as you pointed out, it's expensive. But also the Biden administration has also announced that they're going to give, I don't know, billions of dollars to open about 6 new hydrogen. Mexico governor will be on this.
Okay, so hydrogen is a technology that is usable, like solar PV and wind energy. It's going to be expensive. So that's really the main distinguishing factor to other energy sources or fuels. Now, hydrogen also has the issue of storage and safe handling. And if you have cars, you need to worry about how you refuel cars with hydrogen. There's a lot of aspects that make dealing with hydrogen a lot more dangerous and therefore much more expensive to solve those technical problems, right? That's kind of what the research was about that we looked into, is the storage, the production, storage, and handling of hydrogen. Now, it can be done. It's not that it's impossible. You can use just pressure tanks. You can just use have pressurized hydrogen. We had a PV-powered hydrogen production facility here in Las Vegas in the water district. They power their cars there with hydrogen. So it's all possible. It's not that it's not. It is just, I think, when you scale it up and want to distribute it widely, it's going to be very expensive. That's the biggest downside, right?
So even with government Biden money, can this be successful since the government's going to put in?
Yeah, when you have $4 trillion to spend, you're right, you can make anything successful, right? I mean, it's kind of, it's just a matter of money in the end. The whole idea is here to kind of find a solution that is economical and sustainable, right? Not just possible, right? So there's different qualifiers, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Schulte from Cincinnati. Question for Dr. Hemmer. First, a comment. A little over 10 years ago, the Cincinnati Zoo installed solar panels on top of their parking garage. And at the time, it was told it was one of the largest such projects, either in the United States or the world. In the paper, it gave the cost of the project so many $1 million. Then it said, well, here's how much the zoo is going to save each year. Being an engineer, I did a little quick calculation in the back of the envelope, and I said, oh, payback of over 50 years, which is probably twice the life of the panels. The other day, my wife and I were driving north on I-15 to go up into Utah to see some of the national parks, and I noticed was there 1 or 2 different huge solar panel parks up there. Was that what you were alluding to and during your talk, number one? And number two, is there information you can give us? Are those panels, are those parks really sustainable in terms of economics and what have you? Are they proven what I think is solar panels, again, way too expensive to be sustainable?
Well, you have to look at the entire cycle of those solar panels. First, you have to make them, then their operation, and then you have to dispose of them. Every step has a cost that you need to take into account. You cannot privatize the profits and socialize the expenses, right? That's kind of really what in a lot of cases you're facing. That in Germany, there was this one example. They had rooftop solar on a public government facility, and they had a big display in the waiting room where people could see how much power was generated by that solar panel. And when you calculate it, it's enough power to power the display. So you know, it's not quite honest, right? And that, but the point is, it goes further because the toxic materials, cadmium, lead, and others that can easily leach out in the environment when you just dump it in a field, you actually do need to recycle those materials, right? And that's expensive. And so that is a cost that is really not always taken into account for those solar panels. And there is no back-end solution. There's no requirement for the manufacturer to take those panels back and recycle them, right? You would have to close the entire cycle of those solar panels. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted actually to add something quite interesting. We talked about solar panels, but there are these famous wind farms. And the wind farms are profitable for the investors. No, not the people who sell it in particular. And for the investors, to some extent, they're profitable, but that's not my point. But after a while, when the guaranteed feed-in price, when government, or when the grid basically took your electricity, whether they needed it or not, but there is a period means for many of these wind farms, okay, we stop operation. And there is no way how to recycle them. So for the time being, we dump, then the parts and the basement, the base in the ground, which is giant, we just leave it in the fields. And which is, of course, according to the book, is illegal. They're supposed to be taken out, but nobody takes it out. And so for the time being, it's also another thing. There will be a solution in the future, but for the time being, nobody. And it's a typical case of like, okay, I don't care what happens afterwards. But there's one thing I actually have to add with the solar thing. And it goes also what Tim said. He jokingly, but actually in a serious manner, said, okay, we just print the money. And this is why I didn't mention how many billions the energy transition costs, because these days it's really just, let's just print the money. And when we have now in Germany electricity price of 36 cents per kilowatt hour, then even expensive solar panels, which become cheap thanks to Chinese dumped solar panels, now it pays. It just makes the electricity so expensive that finally it's profitable to have a solar panel to ease the burden.
I also wanted to point out, so that was in Cincinnati. I used to work in a certain administration in Ohio in the governor's office, and the big fight was over solar tax credits. Characteristic of a system that is completely rigged against the taxpayer and for just a few people, a few hours north in Toledo, keeping them in business.
Question.
Yes, my name is Bob Bauman. Oliver, thank you for your kind comments. I have a question, though, for Wolfgang, having to do with, and you may have partially answered it, having to do with feed-in tariffs, and that there was an early program to get people to build wind farms and to take all their precious farmland and the roofs of their barns and put solar panels on them. What is the status of that program, and how? Because it was hurting Germany for a long time, because, as you said, they were forced to buy all the energy that was produced. What is the status of that program, and where is it going? Is it still very debilitating? If you could comment, please.
Yes. I partly answered it. So these guaranteed feed-in tariffs, they're limited. And the wind farm, the lobby of the wind farm industry, they very much hope that these feed-in tariffs, these guaranteed feed-in tariffs, will be extended, which is not necessarily the case. And same actually for solar. So the first solar installations, after the period was so long that it was definitely profitable. They got on average 7% return of investment about. And okay, later then people got even tax issues because they didn't realize, suddenly I'm an entrepreneur, and so I have to pay VAT and all that stuff. But back to the point, as I said, electricity in Germany, it became so expensive that it's profitable, big supermarkets, to cover their roof with solar because they have the peak demand during the day for the cooling and the light. And so actually, as I said, Chinese dump their stuff, subsidized, with forced labor probably to some extent. That's actually why we don't have significant introduction of solar panels in Europe. We buy them from China mainly, and they're actually so cheap that it's actually again profitable because the prices are sky high and they keep on rising. And now some preppers also believe now in solar panels.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, I just want to add you a little bit of a perspective here. A friend of mine installed rooftop solar on his house in Germany years ago, and I asked him how much the cheaper power from the grid and sell my expensive solar to the power companies. And the interesting thing is that thinking in Germany caused one of the biggest wealth transfers in history between the people who live in rental apartments and the people who have houses, or the farmers who don't grow crops anymore, they put solar panels up, and they feed the expensive power into the grid, and the people who cannot do that effectively have to pay for that, the ratepayers, right? To the ones who have rooftop solar, to the ones who have agricultural areas that they can use for solar production and so on. So.
Question?
Thank you. State Representative Mary Dye from Washington State. And a couple of observations. One is that fundamentally our nation was built on innovation. In the last 100 years, certainly, we have been huge beneficiaries of this extraordinary culture of innovation. And of course, Germany has been right alongside of us, you know, in spurring competition in intellectual properties and the way you develop as well. And so, you know, that has been fundamental. But as a legislator, I noticed that we like to run to the newest shiny object because it's politically advantageous to us to champion new technologies. And so the temptation is to build policy around those technologies. 3 examples that we've heard today where we hyper-subsidize something, the hydrogen, and you know, there's hydrogen electrolysis generators in Utah that policy is implementing to incentivize. We have hydrogen electrolysis in a mid-sized commuter aircraft so that it flies on water. And those are very exciting for legislators to try and build policy around to take advantage of the street creds that we obtain from that. And I just would like to ask if there's any way, as a conservative who loves innovation and science, I can craft policy that doesn't do this incestuous type of bill, right? That creates exactly the type of disgusting things that you've expressed here today. How do I say that let's free up the innovative space so that some of these things can be successful without the subsidy? I see companies that take the subsidy, take that revenue and put it into their normal income statement as revenue, and then try to capture a return on investment on the public money instead of looking at the common good. I mean, these relationships are so disgusting to me, they make me upset to my stomach. So what kind of policy language can you provide us as writers that want to incent new innovation in the free market and overcome this preponderance of public spending?
I'll give it a first step just as an overall concept. What you had with technologies that might sound good but would increase the prices. Low energy costs guarantee prosperity. That's it, effectively. And on that you can build everything else, right?
And I should let you know that our government relations director for the Heartland Institute is in this room, and he's going to talk with you further about some of the information that we can give you to help you write good legislation. Thank you for asking.
Can I just add one more thing? And
Yes.
this is just perspective. Be front of mind for when you do handle this stuff. And your own situation is your own situation. But I think if you change that perspective, it isn't on you to innovate. It's on the business. It's on the individual to innovate. And as long as that person is free to do that, that's where the magic is. Actually, it's not magic. It's just who we are as people. So just front of mind as you think about it.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and we have one more questioner.
I'm Ron Cabot from Carmel, California. All right. It's my understanding that Germany has just had its elections within this last month and a half. Prior to the elections, Angela Merkel went outside of the EU and contracted with Putin, the Russians, to supply gas to Germany. Do you believe now that Angela Merkel's basically phasing herself out of politics, that she's placed Germany at risk relative to that transaction?
I got this question over the last 2 days, kind of a few times, and a bit looking back at history. I mean, having grown up, you know, during the time in the 70s, when we got these pipelines and we made this contract with the Federation, with Putin in place, never in this time, ever, anybody from Moscow indicated or hinted that they will use gas as a leverage for anything against us. I'm not talking about Ukraine, but the Ukraine-Russia relationship is a completely different story. And it's like thinking about what other families do. I mean, it's a different issue. Point I want to make, we are dependent on Russian, formerly Soviet, gas supplies. This is true. But for the time being, it never appeared to be risky. At the very beginning, we didn't know. Now we know it is a reliable source. And it costs so much, significantly much more than what we still pay for the other European suppliers. And just one thing about talking about gas, hydrogen, because it was not asked, but I find it funny, you know, when we, here the next showcase with a politician, the model hydrogen car and so on. 96% of the hydrogen that is used in the earth is basically produce 4% of the hydrogen that is in use in this whatever great so-and-so car is one thing which kind of, when people ask about this, some people just want something. The green movement in Germany just want wind and solar. They just love the idea. So it's not about a rational idea. It's like about your feeling, what you think is right. You know, so facts don't matter for most people.
Thank you very much. That concludes our panel here. We have another couple of panels coming up at 11 a.m. Thank you so much to our presenters. They were fantastic.
Hers is falling behind. Nothing in this world could ever bring them down. Yeah, they're invincible, cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids, like the cool kids. Smile, but they haven't got a clue. Yeah, they're living the good life, can't see what he is going through. They're driving fast cars, but they don't know where they're going. In the fast lane, living life without knowing. And he says, I wish that I be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids, like the cool kids. I wish that I could be like the cool that's not really her style. And they all got the same heartbeat, but hers is falling behind. Nothing in this world could ever bring them down. Yeah, they're invincible, and she's just in the background. And she says, I wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids, like the cool kids. He says I'm talking with a big smile, but they haven't got a clue. Yeah, they're living the good life, can't see what he is going through. They're driving fast cars, but they don't know where they're going. In the fast lane, living life without knowing. And he says, I wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids, like the cool kids. I wish that I could be like the I'm too hot or cold, tired, bored, or hungry. I'm fine when you're around me, boy. And you know me, I've never been on time for anything. I do apologize, I know it's such a bother. I promise to try harder for you, girl.
Testing? Okay. If we could take our seats, please. All right, welcome to our side event here entitled Perilous Energy Policies at Home and Abroad. We have kind of a potpourri of different issues that are going to be in this event that range from things like the corporate average fuel economy and fuel efficiency standards to some of the frightening things happening overseas with really kind of a warning for America of what's going on in Germany and Europe with energy policy. And then after we frighten you, we're going to end with something positive about the future of free market energy. We have three sensational speakers here. I think you're going to get a lot out of what they have to say. And I think that you're going to be, we are of course going to leave time for questions and answers at the end. As was said, my name's Craig Rucker. I serve as president of the Washington, D.C. based Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. And on behalf of CFACT, I welcome you here. Our first speaker is going to be going on, Ben Zycher, is going to be talking about changing fuel economy standards. And really, this is a very important topic as it's been in the news lately. Of course, Biden announced very recently a target of 50% electric vehicle sales by 2030. He also rolled out a corresponding plan which would increase the average fuel economy of new passenger cars and trucks 10% in 2023 and 5% each year thereafter. This is a rollback of what Trump did under his safer, affordable fuel efficiency standards, which required a 1.5% annual increase and even exceeds what Obama did back a while ago, where he was going to do a 5% increase through 2026, I believe. May have that wrong, but he'll correct me. But here to talk about that and what that means for our lives and what this means in a broader context is Benjamin Zycher. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, where he works on energy and environmental policy. He's also a senior fellow at the Pacific Research Institute. Before joining AEI, Zycher was a former senior economist at the Rand Corporation, a former adjunct professor of economics at UCLA and Cal State University Channel Islands, and is a former senior economist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. He served as a senior staff economist for the President's Council of Economic Advisors with responsibility for energy and environmental policy issues. So without any further ado, Benjamin, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure many of you know that the Biden administration is in the process of promulgating a new set of fuel efficiency standards, in other words, greenhouse gas emissions limits for cars and light trucks. It's called the National Greenhouse Gas Emissions Standards for passenger cars and light trucks through model year 2026. This is a proposed revision to the Trump administration SAFE rule, which itself was a revision of the Obama administration fuel economy standards for cars and light trucks that was promulgated in 2012. Nominally, the Obama rule mandated a fleet average mileage requirement for any given manufacturer of a little over 50 miles a gallon, and kind of the real world translation of that was a little bit less than 37 miles per gallon. The SAFE rule, the Trump rule, the real world average would have been a bit more than 32 miles a gallon, and the rule now being proposed by the Biden administration is a little over 38 miles per gallon per manufacturer as a fleet average for model year 2026. The proposed rule was published in the Federal Register back in August with a comment period ending, I think it was September 27th, I submitted a comment, and there were 150,000 comments submitted, not all of which are independent. Many of them are just spam from various interest groups. I assumed that the rule would be finalized the very next day, September 28th. That proved not to be the case. I'm not sure where the rule stands now, but it will be finalized. I doubt if they're going to make any changes in it. So the rule, the proposed rule was justified explicitly on the grounds of, quote, climate urgency. That's the phrase that appears in the rule and in the regulatory impact analysis accompanying the rule repeatedly. The rule, and again the analysis accompanying it, asserts that by the time model year 2026 rolls around, CO2 emissions will be reduced. This rule will result in a 5% reduction in U.S. greenhouse gas or CO2 emissions, again by that model year. The Trump rule would have reduced greenhouse gas emissions on a CO2 equivalent basis by ostensibly by 1.7%. Well, let's put aside the 5% number, assume 20%. Let's assume the rule reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 20% from the entire transportation sector. Let's just assume that. And put aside the rule doesn't really apply to heavy trucks, airplanes, ocean transportation. Just assume 20%. That would be a total reduction in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions of about 6%, and a reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions of about 0.7%. If you apply the EPA climate model to that reduction and ask the question, by how much would temperatures be reduced by the year 2100 under an equilibrium climate sensitivity assumption of 4.5 degrees, which really stacks the deck in favor of the rule, it exaggerates the temperature effect. You get a temperature reduction of 13 ten-thousandths of 1 degree from this rule by the year 2100. That's what we're talking. And that's taking their numbers and adding to them, basically, making the case even stronger than they claim it is. So the response I get from the proponents of this rule typically is that, well, yes, it'll have effectively a zero effect by itself, but it's part of a larger effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions both nationally and internationally. And so that's why it makes sense, because it's part of a larger effort. Well, okay, fine, let's play the same game with various policies. The Green New Deal and the Biden net zero proposal are not quite the same. Exaggerate the temperature effect of the proposal, you get about 17/100ths of 1 degree. If you add up all the Paris promises, the nationally determined contributions, which are deeply unserious for reasons we can talk about, I'm not sure if I have time today, you get about 18/100ths of 1 degree. The standard deviation of the surface temperature record is about 11/100ths of 1 degree. These temperature changes would be barely detectable. If the Chinese were to cut their emissions by 50%, you get that same 18/100ths of 1 degree by the year 2100. Even if you believe that there's a climate crisis, I mean, there's no evidence in support of that proposition, but even if you believe that, there is no plausible benefit cost test that these kinds of proposals can satisfy. Accordingly, the proposed fuel economy rule is not, in the language of in the jargon used by regulatory attorneys, is not appropriate, because you're not allowed to pass a rule that's all cost and no benefit. That's essentially what that says. The EPA claims that the rule will increase global GDP annually by a maximum of 75/1000ths of 1%. That, given the the uncertainties and vagaries of economic forecasting, that cannot be a number that is statistically significant. How am I doing on time here?
You're doing fine.
Fine, good. Okay, so I want to focus on the EPA benefit cost analysis of its proposed rule, in particular on the fuel savings component. Essentially, there are three benefits that the EPA claims this rule will generate: fuel savings, climate benefits, and other environmental benefits. I want to focus on the fuel benefits for now. The fuel savings in the EPA climate benefit cost analysis of this rule are twice as big as the asserted environmental benefits and the asserted climate benefits. Without the fuel savings, even given the EPA numbers, the rule fails the benefit cost test. The costs are greater than the benefits. And the problem is that fuel savings are illegitimate as a benefit of regulation. Why? Because market prices reflect the social costs and benefits of fuels. Regulation is supposed to address costs, social costs not reflected in market prices. In other words, what economists call negative externalities. Some of you may have heard of that term. And the problem is that when I make this point to proponents of the rule, they say, well, when people consume gasoline, they're imposing adverse environmental effects on everyone else. That response is false. The environmental externalities, the emissions of carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides and other what are called criteria pollutants, are already addressed by other regulations under the Clean Air Act. And the asserted climate benefits are counted separately in the benefit cost analysis for this rule. So counting them again is double counting. That's essentially what the advocates are trying to do. It gets worse than that. The EPA claims that the present value of the fuel savings is between 120 and 250 billion per year, in total through the year 2050. Well, why do consumers bear these costs willingly? Why aren't they riding bicycles and riding around in Conestoga wagons? It's because motor vehicles must provide some benefits that are greater than the costs of owning and operating and fueling motor vehicles, or the safety, comfort, convenience, privacy, et cetera, et cetera. In 2019, U.S. final sales of gasoline were about $357 billion. Suppose the EPA were to promulgate a rule that outlawed the use of gasoline entirely and forced people to use bicycles and horses and wagons and horse-drawn carts and all the rest. Under the methodology, the benefit cost methodology in this proposed rule and in the regulatory impact analysis that accompanies it, the entire $357 billion would be a net benefit of the rule. The disadvantages of bicycles and all the rest are irrelevant. I mean, that's how bad the methodology is in this rule. In the EPA benefit cost methodology, the more stringent the constraint on fuel use, the greater the benefit from fuel savings, and the greater the net benefit of the proposed rule. I mean, it's absurd, but that's what the EPA under Joe Biden is doing in terms of justifying, in a benefit cost sense, the promulgation of this fuel economy rule. Now, let me just go through a few other glitches in their methodology. EPA, in its analysis of the benefits and costs of this rule, uses the EIA, Energy Information Administration, gasoline price projections from the 2015 annual energy outlook. Why are they reaching back so far? Well, it's not very surprising that I mentioned earlier, the Obama administration promulgated its own fuel economy rule in 2012, And they sought to justify the rule by forecasting really high future gasoline prices. And so you'd get tremendous fuel savings benefits. That's the game that's being played. And so that's why even now in 2021, approaching 2022, the Environmental Protection Agency is using projections from the 2015 Annual Energy Outlook to estimate the fuel savings and thus the net benefits of the proposed rule. Well, what's sort of one analytic problem with this? Well, in 2015, the Energy Information Administration had oil prices, not gasoline prices, but oil prices, and therefore gasoline prices rising at around 3 times the market rate of interest through 2050. Well, that is inconsistent with standard economic theory. For a resource, crude oil, that's depletable and the consumption of which is what economists call substitutable intertemporally. In other words, you can consume a barrel of crude oil today or you can consume it tomorrow. It's substitutable over time. The expected price of crude oil, and therefore gasoline, rises at the market rate of interest. Now, let me explain briefly the intuition behind that. Suppose the market rate of interest is 3%. Doesn't matter what the number is, just pick that number. And suppose everyone thinks that the market price of crude oil between now and a year from now is going to rise at 10%. That's, again, the numbers don't matter. But everybody thinks the market price of crude oil is going to rise faster than the market rate of interest. All right, you own some crude oil. You have a choice to make. You can produce it today, put the money in the bank, and earn 3%, right? Or you can wait, you can hold the crude oil on the ground and sell it next year, and in effect earn 10%, right? So what do? You leave it in the ground for the year, right? Well, everybody does that. So if the market believes that the price of crude oil is going to rise, or any resource is going to rise faster than the market rate of interest, the price is going to rise today and the expected price is going to fall tomorrow because there's going to be less production today and more expected production tomorrow. And so in the equilibrium, at any given moment, the expected price rises at the market rate of interest. That's sort of natural resources economics 101. If you want to read more about this, I wrote a paper debunking a whole bunch of myths in the crude oil context back in 2015, 2016. If you Google my name and the phrase world oil prices, it'll come right up. And I talk about a whole bunch of issues. Anyway, so the point is that the analysis underlying the EPA proposed fuel economy rule is embarrassing, frankly, because of all these assumptions and because of this assumed increase in the price of crude oil vastly faster than the market rate of interest. Okay. They justify the rule in part on the basis of non-climate environmental benefits, in particular reductions in particulate emissions, fine particulates in particular. I don't want to go through the whole scientific controversy over whether the health benefits of additional reductions in fine particulates are measurable. They're not. And Steve Malloy, who's given 1 or 2 talks, has written a lot about this. He's here roaming around somewhere. But the point here is that fine particulates are already regulated as a criteria pollutant under the Clean Air Act. For any criteria pollutant, the EPA establishes what's called the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, NAAQS, that under the law is supposed to protect the public health with an adequate margin of safety. And then states are required to implement rules that allow those states to attain the environmental quality called for under the NAAQS. If EPA is arguing that protection of the public health with an adequate margin of safety is too lax a standard, then they should go to Congress and get a revision in the law. if the standard is fine, but the NAAQS fails to satisfy the law, then it should be tightened. But what EPA essentially is arguing by including particulates, which are already regulated under another section of the Clean Air Act, by including that as a benefit of this rule, they're arguing either that the law is too lax or the NAAQS that exists doesn't satisfy the requirement of the law. If neither of those is true, then the rule will reduce particulate emissions to levels that are inefficiently low. One of those three conditions has to be true. And so the EPA co-benefits this backdoor approach is illegitimate as an analytic matter. They argue that there are energy security externalities. The common energy security, energy independence argument as a benefit of reduced fuel use is simply incorrect. We can talk about this. Energy independence is irrelevant analytically. Nations that import all of their oil face the same oil prices and the same changes in oil prices as nations that import none of their oil. Think of Japan and the UK in that context. The only differences are second order effects like exchange rate shifts and things like that that really don't matter. The usual embargo argument is not correct, notwithstanding 1973. How many of you were willing to admit that you're old enough to remember 1973? Yeah, okay. Three things happened in 1973. There was production cutback by Arab OPEC, which raised global prices. There was the embargo directed at the U.S. and the Netherlands and a couple others that had no effect at all. And there was the imposition of price and allocation controls, which created the gasoline lines and all the market chaos. Think about 1979. There was no embargo that year, but there was a price increase because of the Iranian Revolution and the imposition of price and allocation controls by the Carter administration, and you got gasoline lines, and again, market chaos. The real reason to exploit all efficient energy resources has nothing to do with energy independence. It's because it's a form of national wealth, and people would rather be wealthier than poorer, and appropriately so. There's the sea lane defense argument, which is not correct. Greenhouse gas policies will have no effect at all on the defense budget, and a given Navy cruiser, you can't allocate in a non-arbitrary way the costs of military capital across missions because they're fixed in fixed proportions. That's another set of issues we can talk about some other time. The EPA in this benefit cut, they use global benefits and compare those with U.S. costs, which is both inconsistent with the Office of Management and Budget guidance on how to do benefit cost analysis. There's something called Circular A4, which tells the agencies how they're supposed to do this. By using global benefits but only U.S. costs, it provides incentives for other countries to free ride on U.S. efforts and imposes excessive costs. The global impact of U.S. greenhouse gas policies would be effectively zero. I've already talked about that. A discount rate, when you have benefits and cost streams that over time you have to discount those to a present value, and so you have to apply a discount rate to the streams of costs and benefits. A higher discount rate means that future effects are less important relative to current effects. A lower discount rate means that future effects are relatively more important relative to current effects. Well, EPA uses 2.5, 3, and 5% discount rates for the benefit stream. In other words, they're discounting the benefit stream, they 3%, but 7% for the cost stream. So they're discounting the benefits, the assumed benefit stream at a lower discount rate than the cost stream. So that's going to exaggerate the benefits relative to the cost. It's completely dishonest, but that's what they're doing. They justify this on the grounds of intergenerational. We need to do this for the children, you see. That is simply not correct. Future generations are interested in a bequest of the most valuable possible capital stock, not just one component of it, environmental quality. And so, I mean, think about a Homo sapiens baby born in a cave 50,000 years ago in a world with environmental quality effectively untouched by man. That child at birth would have a life expectancy of something on the order of 10 years, right? So the question, if you could ask that child, would you give up some environmental quality if in return you got better housing, better food, better water, better medical care, a bigger capital stock? The answer obviously is yes. Okay, so the argument that we need to sort of do for future generations in one dimension, environmental quality at the expense of everything else, is fundamentally wrong. Okay, thank you very much. Contact me at any time. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. I mean, I remember the old debate on the fuel efficiency standards under the CAFE rules a while back, and to me the whole thing is kind of nonsense. This seems like a market thing that government's setting what standards cars are at. And one thing you mentioned 1973, I remember cars were spacious back then. They were awesome. And now we have these fuel efficiency standard, we're like in little matchboxes. I used to have a bumper sticker. I think it's environmental. The bigger your car is, it's kind of a law of the jungle survival on the road that, law of the jungle is kind of environmental. The bigger your car, the more chance to survive. I had a bumper sticker that used to say, "My Hummer can crush your Prius." And to return to those days. Anyway, our next speaker is going to be speaking on Germany's successful leftist energy agenda, which has not been a good thing for people back in the fatherland. Holger Thuss. Now, Holger and I go back a ways. We were actually talking about it last night till I think it was 2004. He's from East Germany, so he lived behind the Iron Curtain and has great stories to tell of how he avoided getting into East German army, which are fascinating. We bonded right away because of his dislike for communism, but also he developed a love for country music. How did he do that? He got it from listening to Radio Free America behind the Iron Curtain. Now, it was a little dated. I mean, he was big into the Dolly Parton era and Willie Nelson, but it was quite remarkable that living behind there, he just got up every day, and he kind of knew our music. Fascinating. Anyway, when he came and Germany reunified, he began a group back in, when was that? 2007, eventually, called the European Institute for Climate and Energy in Germany, along with Wolfgang. In 2007, it was founded, and it's made up of economists, engineers, journalists, politicians who regard the assertion of man-made climate change is settled science is not legitimate. Within the framework of its mission, ICE offers its members and partners a platform to discuss and publish scientific findings. Organization produces studies, research papers, organizes symposia and workshops, and attends UN climate meetings, where I've met him all over the world at various times. In fact, they have one coming up this November in Germany, and I'm sure he'll talk about it, and he's done great work, and it's been a real privilege to be able to work with him through the years. Dr. Holger Thuss.
Yeah, hello. Great to be here. Thank you to Heartland for the invitation. Now I have to get familiar with the thing. Yeah, the idea, I mean, everything has been said already, so I thought about what I could tell to you. So I tell you a little bit about our work, because this is closely related to this topic I was asked to talk about. What is the ICCC Institute? A few words have been said. We were, for example, publishing this book lately, which is kind of also an illustration what we are doing, promoting free market and environment ideas, promoting scientific truth, hosting events, and these things practically mirroring an agenda that American think tanks usually also promote. My institute is also active in television, what does this have to do with the headline? I should maybe explain. We have a public television. We have a very strange media structure in Germany, and they get a lot of money. And each little success and everything I'm going to show you is like a little break in their consensus. You know, they spend a lot of money. It's only propaganda all day long, and then there is this little institute which is ICCC, and every little project and every little success we're achieving is like a fist in their face. And I have a few examples here that should illustrate that. So this is our third board member that was not mentioned but should be mentioned, is Mr. Limburg. He's an energy expert, and he's here. This is TV where they present him as, you know, as one of these weird people. But for us, this was one of the first successes as a climate skeptic organization to even present the idea to the German public that there are climate skeptics. Because until we were established, there was this idea of consensus. And I'd like to elaborate a little bit on this consensus. In this debate, and also in the previous debates in this room and also in the other rooms, a lot of people were always asking, yeah, what can we do against these bureaucrats? You know, it's a power grab and all these things. And what can we do? And should we call them? Should we write letters? Or what should we do? The thing is, when you have an institute or whatever you do that is speaking out against this alleged consensus, this is more important than you might think. I just want to emphasize this. Greg has said that I grew up in East Germany. In East Germany, they also needed a consensus. They wanted 99% agreement in their so-called elections. And I've seen for myself how they went to hospitals to even make unconscious people vote in their elections, that they get their 99%. And if there's only 1 or 2 people, or maybe 10 people, or only 300 people in a nation like the US that are speaking out against this alleged consensus, climate consensus, for example, that's already very important. It's much more important than you might think, because it's breaking their consensus. And that was also the basic idea behind the establishment of ICCC. And then, of course, why are they so successful anyway? They spend a lot of money, and there are a lot of smear campaigns, and I have a few hilarious examples how they're doing it in Germany. Here you see a graph, and they produce a lot of graphs about us, and you can probably not see it. It's not very sharp, but they published this in a leading national newspaper. It's like on the level of the New York Times. It's called Süddeutsche. And there in the middle of the circle is ICCC. And then there are all these arrows, guilt by association, this is called. And somewhere there on top is President Trump. Also there's also my name somewhere. And so what they want to say is that, you know, Americans and German conspirators are colluding against this, you know, protecting the climate and all these things. And it's so incredible. I could elaborate for another hour on this, because it shows so many things how our opponents think. It's a projection in a way, because, you know, most of the people on this chart I don't even know. And they're suggesting I work closely, and we're meeting in the same room all the time. And but that's just one example. Here's the same thing at the same time in another newspaper in Austria. And you can also see, you know, this is like called, I would say, exaggeration, because you can see all these logos, C factors there, but also the Heritage Foundation. Everybody knows how large the Heritage Foundation is, and maybe it's not the same level where we are. And also in the end, it's an Austrian newspaper. They add 2 Austrian organizations. This was a Europe-wide media campaign back then. That was the latest. That was 2019, before Corona came up, because Corona ended and all these campaigns. I would call this even, establishing a narrative. You see ICCC in Europe, you see Heartland in America, and a lot of, oil wells, and then there is a bag with dollars going over the Atlantic. And that was the result of undercover journalism. When we had our last conference, there were people with hidden camera trying to prove something which they couldn't prove, and also this came in all the media. That's also a nice graph of that kind. There you also see the CFACT logo, our logo, and lots of people that don't know. That's the proof, actually, that just my office. Yeah, that's how I look when I find a hairdresser. Then other stuff we are doing is hearings. When you start an institute, when you establish yourself as an organization of experts, it's possible that they invite you to hearings. For you, this might not be totally new, but for us, this was new, because until the establishment of the conservative AfD party, we were never invited to hearings, but after the election of this party to the German parliament in 2017, we were regularly invited to speak there. And perhaps Neil Shaviv, I think he was also speaking at the Heartland conferences. And there's another expert. This is like totally annoying. And the interesting part is that this is all, you can find this also on their own video website. You can, whatever we have to say, you're reaching even more people. That's again Mr. Limburg. We also go to the state parliaments and speaking there. And the other gentleman in the white shirt is the representative of the wind turbine industry. That's why he's looking so happy to sit next to Mr. Limburg. This is a quote from the newspaper that I tried to translate as a bottom line of why we are doing all this. Right-wing populists, that's more or less us, and inviting deniers, absurd sham debates, that's what this woman said, and stealing our time is also a good thing. So if you cannot stop a process, you can at least slow it down. And all these little drops can form a hole in a stone. This I don't have to talk about this. This is from Anthony Watts. Many people have talked about this. This is the graph to what Wolfgang said in the previous debate. All these prices only know one direction, upwards. This is how it looks in Germany with energy prices, and I think if I had a more updated graph, the increase would be even steeper. And just to emphasize once more the relevance of what we are doing in our country. The other issue when you do this kind of work we are doing, there are also other responses. After a while, they were then switching to science. Books were coming out. It's like the credibility of science, or Climate skepticism in Germany is the other one. They were written by government bureaucrats. And these people obviously got time and resources to write books at work, and they were then distributed all over government agencies. And whatever they say on the front page, the topic is this obscure IK Institute, our institute. That was after a couple of years only, showing the relevance of this work we did. And what you can see is this triangle. I mean, what President Trump always says, the swamp. But there's not only a swamp made out of politicians, it's also a swamp made out of scientists and media persons, and closely colluding together. And that's kind of the secret of their success, really to cover all areas of society and not just politics. Maybe this sounds familiar to you, but I'm still talking about Germany. Yeah, this is the other dimension that was not in a triangle. Also in Germany, climate alarmism has religious features, or has even the quality of a religion. Yeah, and all these quotes. This is you can find this everywhere. Yeah, Greta is the new Jesus. It's a bishop said this in Germany, seriously. And they were also allowed to preach in churches. They had their climate sermons and all this. So this is not just polemicism to say that climate alarmism is a religion. Yeah, that was the famous conference James was already talking about. This was the former entrance of the Munich airport. And the small picture is the protests outside. And it says, "We found you," because we kept this secret. And just to make this clearer, it's unfortunately in German, it says, "Save the climate, destroy capitalism." Yeah? Or unseat capitalism, is more or less destroy capitalism. So they themselves admit on their science they want to destroy capitalism. It's also not polemicism. So that's maybe the fourth or the fifth element of their success story, that they could even motivate the extreme left to contribute to this great transformation program. Then you cannot read this, but maybe if you're familiar with German politics, these three guys on the bottom are the most prominent politicians of the Green Party. And they were officially asking the German government already like 2-3 years after our foundation, what is this all about with this IK Institute? Do they receive funding, was one of the questions. Are you aware of a certain Fred Singer speaking in the German parliament? And so I'm very proud to speak in the Fred Singer room about this, because he was, of course, one of our mentors when we started the Institute. So again, this is another indication how dead serious the other side it takes when someone speaks out, starting a little institute, writing a few pamphlets and so forth. So this was officially debated in the German parliament, and we hadn't even started. And again, it also reveals a little bit how these people think, because your therapist, if you have one, could explain this better. There's a lot of psychology involved. It's mainly what they do reflected on us. I find this very interesting to read what they have to say about us for that reason. Yeah, but that was not enough. So after a while, they started to activate their bureaucracy. This is, for example, the official letter of the state authority of the protection of personal data. And suddenly links to Facebook and Amazon were a criminal offense because we were not respecting the private data of our page users of our website. And with this letter, this was 8 pages long, we had to implement changes on our website that would cost us a couple of $10,000, and this had to be done within 6 weeks, and they were seriously threatening us to shut down our website. So this was 2019, as far as I see, like about 12 years after our foundation. This is when it got a little bit more serious. And at the same time, also a private service company, financial services, quitted the contract with us, this company, because in this text it says, you do not share our values and we don't want to do business with you. And okay, it's a private company, but this is their clients, and you see a lot of miserio. This is like charities of the church, the Red Cross, you see the Red Cross, and CDU is a major political party in Germany. Of course, if you have such clients so close to the state, you want to be obedient of a financial service as a financial services company. And then somebody like Eike is somehow in the way. Then this is a new thing. I'm sure you're aware of this, fact checkers. And then they started to fact check. And that might be interesting to you. So there was these articles coming out, a network of climate deniers, la 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 la. And I was you know already the content of the article if I tell you the headline. But the thing was, since this was an Austrian article, I mean, one is wondering all the time what these articles are about because nobody cares. It's very repetitive, yeah. And you can see on the bottom that there is, since it's Austria and they have to be transparent, there is such a code. It was supported by a grant of the European Union Freedom of the Press Foundation or something like this. So I was Googling this, and then you find this European Center, we have this on the EU level, European Center for the Press and Media Freedom. It's exactly the opposite of what it says, of course. And also European Union is financing this, but also that's why it is so important to also say this at the conference in Las Vegas. When you look at the bottom, who is financing EU Anti-Freedom Center of the Press? Or I was a little bit enlarging this. I'm sure you know Open Society Foundations, who this is. This is George Soros' foundation, and this other is the NED, I think it's from the Democrats, isn't it? Yeah, it's the political organization of the Democratic Party, financing campaigns against institute like my institute in Europe. Isn't that amazing? I'm not sure if this is if the American taxpayer or the American public knows these things, how these organizations interfere in the climate policy of other countries. So all these articles like that, European Network of Climate Deniers, Der Standard, Austrian major newspaper, or the same thing you see also here. It's this fund IJ4EU. This was an entire campaign for all major newspapers in Europe, funded by taxpayer money, but also by American taxpayer money. It started in 2018, and here you can even see how much money this is, 32,000 euro. It's not much money, but if you think it's 2 journalists, and journalists are not very wealthy, for them it's really a lot of money. That's what you find when you do the research. And of course, the average media consumer is not aware of these things. Yeah, this is the woman who received the money. She also got some, here this is a little bit showing that she also got money from the labor unions. This is also something you know from America, I suppose. Then the other thing that is just, something to think about, food for thought. Why do people think they are dissenters, and at the same time they promote Marxist ideas? Do you understand this? I think when you promote ideas that everybody wants to hear in media and academia, you're not a dissenter. But they, in their own image, they still believe this. And this was also about us, but at least what you can show here is when we say they're communists, it's not very polemic. It's not polemic at all because they themselves promote their stuff with the face of Karl Marx. And when I think about Karl Marx with my background, I more think about this. I don't think if you promote Marxism, you're a cool dissenter or a postmodern smart person of any type. This is this museum in Cambodia where they present to you the real result of communist policies, and we have to be very cautious that we do not end up ourselves in such a situation. And that's me throwing out a journalist of my own conference, and that's already what I wanted to say, and yeah, stay peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Holger. It's been a delight because I've met Holger early. In fact, I said he liked country western. We used to drive around Europe, probably the only ones on the road, driving from country to country, listening to Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and that. But I saw his outfit grow from a small entity to one that holds an annual conference despite tenacious opposition. Him and Wolfgang are true heroes in the cause. I've had occasion on myself to go to some of his conferences and actually confront these people, as did Lord Christopher Monckton. I offer you encouragement. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said when he saw big protest crowds in Europe gathered to go out and give him hell every time he went out there, they say, reporters came to him and said, is this getting to you? Is this, bringing you down? He kind of smiled. He said, no. And I look out into the crowd and I see the faces and who those people are that are opposing us. I think to myself, we must be saying and doing the right thing, which was not quite the answer I think the media wanted. So you're saying and doing the right thing. Take heart. All right, we're going to go from some fairly dark things here with the corporate average fuel economy and some of the opposition we're getting in Europe to our climate realist message to one of hope and optimism. Rob Bradley is going to kind of look at the future of free market energy and give us some positive insights into where we might be able to go with our movement. Rob Bradley, Jr. is a CEO and founder of the Institute for Energy Research, a senior fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, an energy and climate change fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. He's held honorary positions at the University, currently working on his next book, Energy Crisis and Leviathan, surveying the history of U.S. policies during World War I, the New Deal, and right through the 70s, and other emergency episodes. So without any further ado, Robert.
The last session, I know you're tired. Well, everyone, please stand up. Get the circulation going, and then you can applaud. Okay? All right. I've been giving lectures for a long time, and finally I got a standing ovation, so I really appreciate it. Okay. Free market energy, keeping the vision. These are discouraging times. This is a cartoon, actually, that was right after the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, the Great Recession. Capitalism is dead, growth industry, and here we are 12, 13 years later, and it's really the same thing in the name of climate change. We're in a discouraging situation. We're playing defense, virtually no offense. But one of the messages I want to share with you today is even the United States has been in very strange negative energy situations before. We have come back, and our ideas are so strong that we have the intellectual case, and I think it's a case that can be shared and sold with the general populace, the citizens, to get them to come our way. It's going to take a lot of trial and error, but we can do it. World War I, United States pretty much had a free market energy policy, and President Woodrow Wilson and all the experts, the economists, they love this idea of central planning. So the idea of an emergency in a war, let's central plan. They passed a law giving the federal government virtually unlimited powers in the name of the emergency, national defense. And they, for energy, they created the U.S. Fuel Administration. They imposed price controls on a variety of oil products, also coal. And as Milton Friedman used to say, economists don't know much, but they know how to make a shortage, and that is to have price controls that are less than the market levels. So we have all these things, gasless Sundays, heatless Mondays, meatless Tuesdays. I really need to read it from here. Wheatless Wednesdays, nightless nights. And you have all these bureaucrats in Washington. Yes, they have local offices, but it's a complete mess. And in an emergency, you need market prices and profit loss even more than you do in normal times. And so there was a tremendous waste of resources going to bureaucrats and the rest of it. World War II was a reenactment on a larger scale, and they actually had ration books to get gasoline, to get coffee, to get a variety of things. And the sort of the end game of the climate crusade will be having energy rationing, maybe even carbon rationing. And of course, the people that can get the big allotments, such as in World War II, are the politicians and the bureaucrats. You know, they're the A users, and maybe public school teachers too, and then at the bottom are the forgotten men and women. The 1970s, Ben Zycher was great on this. One note, the United States was having an energy crisis before the Arab embargo of October 1973. The father of the U.S. energy crisis was Richard Nixon, who imposed wage and price controls in August 1971. And in 1972, we were starting to get spot shortages at the gasoline pumps. It was worse in the next year before the Arab embargo, and they actually had the first hearings in Congress on this whole new idea called energy conservation. So much of this came as an unintended consequence of the temporary 90-day wage and price controls of President Nixon in August of 71. A cancel alert. I had an email exchange with a gentleman named John Holdren, who I think many of you know. He was the two-term science advisor to President Obama. He and Paul Ehrlich wrote a number of essays and books in the 70s, and I did a study of everything that he had written, and I even worked with his secretary, Patricia, to get all sorts of things that he had done. And when I was complete and I wrote a report for the Competitive Enterprise Institute, I shared it with him, and I had all his quotations. I asked him, is there anything that you'd like to take back? Have you changed your mind on anything, such as what Paul Ehrlich said you said, and that is by 2020, 1 billion people may die of climate change. And he wrote me a letter back, and just 2 paragraphs from the letter Basically, my students can indeed benefit from the best arguments on all sides, but they will not find the best of anything in either your polemics or Lomborg's. You appear to be lacking both discernible qualifications in the real world and the ability to tell a good argument from a bad one. Boom. This is interesting because it's a cartel of intellectual thought where they can't give you anything, because if they give you anything, then the dike weakens and it can explode. They just, well, we already know what you're saying. What you're saying is not new and it's all wrong. That's a cancel culture. So humility is a good thing, so I'm warning all of you to don't automatically believe everything I'm about to say. When you think of the experts in business and economics and the social world, there's lots of precedent that there's not only market failure, there's not only government failure, but there's analytic failure. The smartest guys in the room. And all this intellectual error, which is now mainstream with the climate debate on both the science, physical science side and the economic science side, is just something that I hope future generations will look back on and not allow it to be repeated. Free market energy, I think we have a very solid worldview. We need to keep it in mind. We need to have the moral high ground. We need to be proud of each other for going against the mainstream. And I think there's reasons for optimism. Classical liberalism, which you can also call it small l libertarianism or the science of liberty, it is a worldview that really makes sense. It hangs together. You have to study it a little more than you do the other side. You know, the government intervention side, you see a problem, pass a law. Well, it takes a lot more understanding to appreciate the free market and why doing the easy thing with government has unintended consequences and negative intended consequences. Private property rights, not only for the surface and infrastructure, but in the case of mineral energies, the subsurface. These are books and articles by a gentleman, Guillermo Yates, and he advocated private property rights for the landowners to the center of the earth. If you can do this in Mexico, in Argentina, in Saudi Arabia, you would give tremendous wealth to the surface owners, and you would get this wealth out of the hands of government. There's all sorts of advantages. You democratize wealth, you develop your resources efficiently, and you keep all this power out of the government. And this should be the #1 international energy issue, not climate change. So if you want to play offense, let's go after this. Let's help the commoners become wealthy, like so many in Texas and the United States under private property rights. Voluntary transactions. Surely capitalist acts between consenting adults, as Robert Nozick said in a very famous 1975 book, surely that gives us the moral high ground that we don't need a third party introducing coercion, that one-on-one we voluntarily enter into contracts and get the energy that we want. The rule of law, simple rules for a complex world, I would say. You want laws against force and fraud. You don't want to get prescriptive with regulations. Richard Epstein, the University of Chicago, is very good on this. Neutral limited government, I don't need to say too much more about that. Maybe I should add decentralized, localized, more localized the better. In civil society, this is so important. It's different from for-profit entrepreneurship, the business world, and government. Capitalism creates great wealth for civil society to do good things. However, civil society has been corrupted today by climate alarmism, and it's a real shame. The threats to energy rationalism, Malthusianism, Malthus' 1798 work on population, where he basically said population would increase geometrically and resources would increase arithmetically. There'd be, the difference would be misery or vice. We'd have to have plagues, we'd have to have starvation. So this was quite a shock to the Adam Smith's view of the world, where the invisible hand was going to bring progress ad infinitum. Out of this came the modern Malthusians, the I equals PAT equation, where negative environmental impact was the result of increasing population, increasing affluence, and technology. Now, John Holdren, he's a fisherman. He likes to get in his little motorized boat, and he has a fish finder, one of those electronic deals. And I've written a blog saying, hey, you're violating the PAT, but there might be a double standard there. The idea of deep ecology or nature worship, this is very big in the environmental movement. And here's a quotation where they basically say the planet has been delivered in perfect condition. Don't change the thermostat, okay? So the idea that we have a warming, natural and or anthropogenic of 1 to 2 degrees in the last century, and you can walk across the street and not notice a temperature change, increase of that amount, that somehow that over the decades and even a century we can't adjust to. The idea that global warming or global cooling from the human influence on climate, that none of this is good, that we're playing God with climate. So the idea here is that natural climate is optimal and climate is very fragile. So anthropogenic, whether it's warming or cooling, and we weren't sure if it was warming or cooling decades ago. And even Holdren and Ehrlich, they said there's global cooling from the human influence, there's global warming. We're not sure how it's all going to play out, but you're fooling around with the complicated machinery of nature. Okay, so this deep ecology idea is a very dangerous one, and it's a reason why we have this religion of stasis. Soft energy paths, Amory Lovins in the 1970s, wind, solar, and conservation, and Lovins said, conservation is not only a free lunch, it's a lunch you're paid to eat. Let's change all the lighting here and it's just an automatic money saver. Forget the idea of sunk costs, this is already there. In a technical sense, you replace the lighting and you reduce usage, but don't worry too much about capital costs. Very fallacious, and it assumes that entrepreneurs aren't profit maximizing, cost minimizing. And finally, I'm not sure if this is working. Maybe I should end. Should I keep going, y'all? Oh, small is beautiful. E.J. Schumacher. This was real big in the 70s, and Jimmy Carter loved it. And the idea that you can have distributed generation, that everyone can have their own little power plant, so to speak, with solar and batteries. The fallacy here is that The central station model for electricity, where you have big generation units and you have transmission lines, there's big economies of scale, not only in generation and transmission, but the fact that you have a lot of consumers on the same system and we have different usage profiles means there's a higher average load factor for all these assets. And it was a model that was proven by Samuel Insull in the late 19th century, and it's one that still applies. It's very expensive to go off the grid. Threats to energy rationalism, just concluding, this has resulted in a lot of error, bias, and bullying. You know, there's all sorts of problems with this. You get the arguments out there and the other side will cancel you. I'm going to end with a couple of Ayn Rand quotes, and let me see if I can read it from here, and apply these to the current debate. And for some of you that have read Atlas Shrugged, that is a book that's becoming more fiction into fact every day. First quotation, "The hardest thing to explain is the glaringly evident which everyone has decided not to see. The businessman's tool is value, the bureaucrat's tool is fear." And I'm having trouble reading this, but basically saying that a government intervention in business creates problems where more government intervention is necessary. And then finally, we are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases while the citizens may act only by permission. I think it's a winnable fight ahead. We have energy reality on our side, which really boils down to the idea of energy density, that the mineral energies, the fossil fuels, they're the sun's work over the ages that's created a stock of energy, and this is so much more efficient than the very dilute flow from the sun changing in the winds, where the supply is very dilute and intermittent. And you need so much infrastructure to turn this dilute energy into something that's useful that it really makes you anti-environmental to support wind and solar. Climate reality, that's what the conference has been all about. The fact that we have high expectations, that when's the last time someone has had a cold shower? You know, when it's hot in the summer, do you really want to have it at 76 degrees like they were telling everyone in California? If it's cold outside, do you really want your temperature at 67? I don't think so. And of course, in the developing world, we have rising expectations. They have every right to have first-class energies because they're first-class citizens. So let's keep the vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, at this time, we will invite questions from the audience. If you could just state who you are. If you're with an organization, just mention that, and then direct your question to one or all the panelists, whatever you like. Ron, go ahead.
Am I on?
You're on.
Ron Stein. The question's for Ben. The statement about Biden wanting to change the mileage standards and reduce CO2 emissions by 5%. To me, it's apparent he must be oblivious to the fact the United States represents about 4% of the world's 8 billion people. In the developing countries that need abundant, reliable, affordable electricity, they got a lot of coal-fired power plants. China, India, Indonesia, Africa. By the end of 2030, those 4 countries are expected to have 3,000 coal-fired power plants. How are the Americans, they're going to have to incur the cost and lifestyle changes going to react when this becomes transparent over the years that we're basically trying to reduce CO2 emissions here and we're losing ground to the developing world?
All right. I think that was addressed to you, Ben, but if somebody else...
Yes, it was addressed to Ben.
Okay.
I didn't quite, forgive me, I didn't quite follow what question you're asking about the U.S. versus as part of the world.
Well, we're going to incur a lot of cost to reduce 5%, CO2 emissions by 5%. And that cost is going to be out of our pocket, and it's going to affect lifestyle standards that it's going to be regressive on the poor people. And when we recognize that, you know, we're trying to reduce emissions when the world is increasing emissions, we're losing ground. And is it just a state,
Well,
something to make us feel good?
I mean, you're absolutely right, and you know, it's already been recognized that a number of nations, the Chinese and others, will not meet their Paris agreement, their Paris commitments, their national determined contributions, nor will any, quote, strengthening, unquote, of the NDCs to be established in Glasgow later this year, next month, I guess, will matter. The problem really is much more fundamental. If you look at the nationally determined contributions, the promises made by the signatories to the Paris Agreement, what you will discover is that the emissions reductions that have been promised are all relative to a, quote, business as usual, unquote, baseline. In other words, nation X is saying, okay, if we don't do anything, our emissions will follow this particular path. We're going to cut our emissions below that path by X%. That's our promise. Well, the business as usual baseline is driven by assumptions about economic growth between now and the end of the century, right? The faster economic growth, the more your emissions are going to be. And so if a nation overestimates its future economic growth by a couple tenths of a % per year, which then, you know, when economic growth proves slower than that, they will have achieved their emissions cuts without any underlying actual reduction in their emissions behavior. I mean, it's really quite a scam, and that really is the right word. And I think that sooner or later, people are going to recognize that, and that the whole thing is really a perpetual motion machine for bureaucrats and foundation presidents and corporate honchos and leftists to, you know, go to fancy resorts on someone else's dime and eat in fancy restaurants and fly on private planes and do all the things that they're urging the unwashed masses not to do.
Yeah, I might add to that. James Hansen, the father of the climate alarm, has called the Paris Agreement a fraud, a complete fake. You know, he says the only way you're going to address this is by having high carbon fees, his fee and dividend, but you're going to have a real high tax. Everyone is going to have the tax. You're going to have international trade restrictions, so-called border adjustments. And this is just a start. And Hansen and others think that nuclear power is going to be the answer. But the new generation nuclear power plants, a couple of which have been completed in the Middle East, are 4 to 5 times more expensive than a gas-fired plant, and they take 7, 8 years to build. So the other side's in a real quandary here.
All right, can we have a second question?
Dr. Zycher, my name is Dennis Groh. I'm from the Detroit area. Just a follow-up question. When the EPA in its proposal was asking or talking about credits and benefits like gas savings, did they also include in there the a discounted cash flow for the increasing cost of the automobile to meet the energy standards, or is that just kind of conveniently left off?
Well, there's some arm waving in the regulatory impact analysis about the effect of the rule on the price or the cost of building vehicles. But I think I've got to go back and look at it. I haven't looked at it in a while, in a couple of months at least, but my impression at the time is they were lowballing. We have estimates of what it costs to produce vehicles with greater mileage characteristics in terms of lighter materials, more advanced transmissions. You know, the environmental left likes to pretend that's all free. It's not, of course. The EP, I don't remember the numbers, but I remember my impression was they were lowballing those numbers, and they were vastly smaller than the fuel savings. Well, fine. Then the question becomes, why aren't people buying those cars, voluntarily? If the fuel savings are so much greater than the present value of the capital costs, it's a great deal. Why not? Why do we observe consumers not doing this? I can't get a straight answer to that question from anyone involved in this process.
Hi, Greg Goodnight, Right Climate Stuff. Ben, this question's for you. I thought Mr. Biden made this cost-benefit thing very easy. He signed an executive order right after he took office saying that for henceforward, they're not going to consider cost benefit in the environmental area. That, in other words, any amount of cost is justified for any amount of benefit. Is it legal to do this? I mean, what are the practical effects of this executive order?
The Clean Air Act, as amended, says that the establishment of national ambient air quality standards must protect the public health with an adequate margin of safety without regard to costs. I'm paraphrasing, but cost considerations are not to be are proscribed in terms of establishing the national ambient air quality standards for criteria pollutants. So already the emissions, once you reach an equilibrium, once the regulations are established and the states implement their rules and approach attainment of the NAAQS in the various regions, if cost considerations are excluded from the regulation of criteria pollutants, then the emissions of those pollutants are already too low because you're considering only benefits and not costs. But for hazardous air pollutants, not criteria pollutants, but for hazardous air pollutants, costs are relevant, and the courts have determined that the regulations have to be, quote, appropriate, meaning they have to pass some sort of benefit cost test. You can't just impose a regulation without, the Obama administration tried to do that in their MATS rule, the mercury and air toxic standard, and the courts threw it out because they couldn't show any benefits, but they were showing hundreds of billions of dollars of costs.
Will that specific executive order hold then?
I'm sorry?
Will that specific executive order that was signed in January hold? Will it be legitimate? Will it be upheld by the courts?
I don't know. The lawyers have to fight that out. I'm just not sure how the judges would.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're coming up to the end of our time. We have time for one more question.
Okay, probably a short question for Rob Bradley. In 1972, I had a physics class, and my professor, I guess you'd call him a bit woke today, we have one of our books from that class was a Sierra Club battle book on energy by Paul Ehrlich. And in that book, he was, amongst the strategies, he was mentioned nuclear fission, and he thought it had a lot of good possibilities. So has his position on nuclear fission changed significantly since then, or is he still holding to that?
That's a real good question. The environmentalists and nuclear, there's a split over the with them. I don't think Ehrlich is on the nuclear bandwagon even now. He probably, nuclear fission is sort of the dream of dreams. It's always out there, it's always possible, but even the new generation nuclear technology, number one, it's new, it's experimental, there's going to be trial and error, and whereas the most recent nuclear plants we built here in the U.S., Plant Vogtle in Georgia, the cost on that is something like 10 to 15 times greater than if they had built a natural gas combined cycle plant for the same megawattage. So I'm a nuclear pessimist, I hate to say, but it is a backstep technology. But as far as I know, Ehrlich and the Sierra Club are still anti-nuclear.
All right, well, that will conclude our time here, and I want to thank you for attending. Our speakers will be up here at the front if you have any further questions, but thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of the conference.